afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to the Research Reflection and Practices Forum, guest lecture 12. And we have a few people also joined in online. So, good afternoon to you all too. So today's lecture is on public policy, the division of labor between the market and the government, by none other than our Executive Director, Dr. Herath Gunatilaka. So I warmly welcome you to this platform. And some time back, we had a RQL session and Dr. Herath presented another different version of looking at the economy mostly. And at that, I gave a brief introduction to him, but nevertheless, I would like to take you through a brief introduction, especially about his publications. So, Dr. Gunatilaka's professional work revolves around agriculture at the beginning. So he was professor and the head Department of Agricultural Economics, University of Peradeniya. Then he was the director of the Environment and Safeguards Division in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of the ADB. Dr. Gunatilaka has a bachelor's degree in agriculture from the University of Peradeniya, and then he has a postgraduate diploma in sustainable agriculture, as well as a master's in natural resource management from the University of Norway, and a PhD in resource economics from the University of Hawaii from the United States. So when I was compiling this, I wasn't sure whether he was a development economist or even whether he was an environmental economist. So then I had to ask him this because his background is so much between both of these two things. And then he told me, I'm both of these, but call me an economist. So I present him as an economist, and he has had some very extensive training in environmental economics and policy analysis from Harvard, and leadership for sustainable development at Cambridge University in England, and a training, these are two trainings, in environmental valuation and design and selection of economic policy instruments for the environment from the Gothenburg University in Sweden. Of course, when you look at his CV, which I got down today, he has lots of training which he has done at ADB, etc. So this is only a small snippet of what he has been doing. So publications, he has more than over 50 journal articles. I strongly suggest you all to go to ResearchGate, especially those ones who are doing economics in the area of economics and agriculture and even social sciences. They're all up there for you to have a look. Articles, journal articles, has done with the experts, well-known experts, and he has done 5 books, mainly on energy, natural resources, and environmental economics. His recent publications are on economics of biofuel, hydropower development and economic growth, impact evaluation of energy sector investments, private sector participation in infrastructure provisions in water, electricity, energy, trade and regional cooperation, and also in sector. So I'm just going to show you 3 of his books: Cost-Benefit Analysis for Development, a Practical Guide, Food Security, Energy Security, and Inclusive Growth in India, the Role of Biofuels, both done by Asian Development Bank, and Environmental Valuation, Theory and Application, published by the Postgraduate Institute of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya. So I would now like to welcome again, once again, Dr. Gunatilaka to take us through this topic, public policy, the division of labor between the market and the government. I think very relevant topic, and this is our learning platform. So let's engage with a very nice Q&A. And so over to you, Dr. Gunatilaka.
Thank you, Indika, for your kind words about me. And this was, I planned to do this several times. Finally, today, I'm able to do it. This topic that I thought is very relevant, in fact, to understand the current problems in the country. So I thought it is, interesting topic, but for some of the well-trained economists, some parts of this lecture may be boring because many of my colleagues here are not economists, so I have to tone it down and discuss about some of the things that economists generally know. But my audience is mixed, so my colleagues who have trained in economics should bear with me on certain sections of this presentation. And I will initially discuss a little bit about public policy, and then I will talk about markets. And finally, I will go into the main topic of the main section of the discussion on how we should really divide the labor between market and the government. So let me start with this and skip this slide. I will present it later. When it comes to public policy, I generally feel, especially in Sri Lanka, this may be one of the words that is misunderstood and also misused to a certain extent. Therefore, let us just look at what is a public policy initially, and then we can really approach our issue here. Now, public policy is defined as declared state objectives relating to health, morals, and well-being of the citizenry. So here, actually, if you look at this definition, this health and well-being, actually, health is part of the well-being. So we can basically say that from this definition that the public policy deals with the morals and well-beings of citizens in the country. And again, definition below actually address the process of policy making. It says that these policies are made in response to a perceived problem of constituency. So that in a democratic system, that the elected government is responding to what citizens are demanding. Actually, in the practice, sometimes, what citizens demand and what government promise and actually what governments do can have a lot of gaps. But the extensiveness of the gap eventually decide the development of the country. And every country, I think there are certain gaps between what is promised in an election campaign and what is delivered at the end. So, but important of this definition is actually it tells us the process of policy making. It should be a response to the perceived problems in the country by its citizens. And then generally, public policy instruments include many things like, regulatory measures, taxes, subsidies, funding priorities, budget priorities. There are many tools that are available for the government to implement its policy. And finally, we come to economic policy. It's those previous definitions are a little bit broad, but economic policy definition, it narrows it down, saying that it's a course of action that is intended to influence or control the behavior of the economy to maximize social welfare. So the ultimate objective is to improve the well-being of the citizens. How we control or how we influence the economy to achieve that objective, that is economic policy. Now, when you think about economic policy and public policy, actually the difference lies with the morals part, moral values. And it is a debatable issue whether government is the right institution to maintain certain level of moral values in a society. Actually, there are religions, school education, families also deal with the same issue, moral values and so on. So it is debatable whether government is the best institution that maintains certain set of moral values in a society. If you keep that aside, some may argue it is the role of the government, some may say it's not. So let's not go into that debate. Broadly, one can say the economic policy and public policy are very similar. If you leave that moral part out. Actually, there's if you look at the history of economics, economics is a relatively new subject compared to some of the sciences and others. Economics as a subject was born in a moral philosophy department. Adam Smith was working in a moral philosophy department, and there were a lot of opposition at that time when economics was introduced by the philosophers, saying that that discipline will destroy the moral values of a society. Early readings say many things about it. Now, since we came down to economic policy, let me talk a little bit about this slide. It's not very visible. I mean, it was very clear that the objective of the economic policy is to maximize social well-being. Now, in that context, the most important theory in economics is the first fundamental theorem of welfare, which says the pre-market equilibrium is Pareto efficient. I think this statement, generally, when I talk to any audience who are not economists, it flows over your head because you cannot understand anything from that. So let me take a little while to explain what is Pareto efficient and what we really mean by that. Actually, before I go into that, if you really look at the history of economics, initially, this was the main theme of the Adam Smith's book on economics. Without using mathematics, only through logical reasoning, he said the invisible hands of the market will give the best social outcome. The same thing actually proved mathematically later by Kenneth Arrow. Actually, he did that for his PhD thesis and he got Nobel Prize for that. He mathematically proved that pre-market equilibrium gives the maximum social welfare. Now, to get into this little bit more, let me quickly go through a few very simple things that so that you get a sense. Actually, this is a very brief description. This, if I'm doing a master's course or a PhD course, this is 6 to 9 hours of lectures. I'm just summarizing it in a very simple way. So that, if you, in the production side, we have one basic tool in economics called isoquants. That is, the isoquant it gives a relationship between output and the combination of inputs. So along one isoquant, the production level is constant, and labor, in this particular case, I'm just taking a very simple example, labor and capital. By combining labor and capital in different proportions, you can have the same output. So that is the basic idea of that. In an isoquant map, if you go above, say if you go from this direction above, you are going to higher production levels. So this is a basic thing. And then Edgeworth is an economist. He put two isoquants together and created this Edgeworth box. He also got Nobel Prize. You see how easy to get the Nobel Prize in economics, right? Okay, so, but this gives us a very, very easy tool about improving efficiency in production. Now, if you look at this diagram, if you look at point P and move to point C, you are on the same isocount for producing one commodity. That means production level is the same. But for the other commodity, you are going to higher isocount. That means you produce more of that commodity. That means you are it is more efficient. That move is efficient. So with that reasoning, whenever these isocounts are intersecting with each other, these are the efficient points. Those efficient points are then we can convert to a production possibility frontier that gives the input combination that gives the highest level of production. So when you come to the production possibility frontier, what we are doing is we are removing the inefficiencies in production by reallocating resources in the economy. And the same thing we can do for consumption. There's a very similar curve called indifference curve. That means like your production is constant, you have same level of satisfaction. For whatever reason, we use the term utility instead of satisfaction in economics. So you have the same level of utility along this indifference curve by consuming two different commodities. This is true only for the graphical analysis. We can do this for n number of commodities with mathematics. So similar way that we can eliminate the inefficiencies and then we get these intersection points, which will give us something called consumption efficiency locus. So that means when we come to the consumption efficiency locus, we also eliminate the inefficiency in consumption. Production inefficiency, you may be easy to understand. You might think that you can produce more with less inputs. One way to understand the efficiency. But what is the efficiency in consumption? Efficiency in consumption is allocating the resources to those who value them the most. That is, we also call allocative efficiency. So once we have these two, then we finally, since there can be many different consumption efficiency curves, we take the outermost part of that and that will give us something called grand utility frontier. This is a very important concept. That tells us that given the resource endowment in a country, labor, natural resource, capital and all that, and the prevailing technology and people's preferences, because consumers prefer certain commodities over other. Once you take all that into account, the maximum social welfare can be achieved if you are on the grand utility frontier. If you are below that, that means there are still some inefficiencies. And if you are above that, you cannot go above because your resources are limited. So only way you can go above is if you expand the resource envelope. If you find a new deposit of oil or if you find a new technology, you can have a higher grand utility frontier. So this is the most important outcome of all this, eliminating the inefficiencies. So now we can go back to what we were talking about, Pareto efficiency. What it basically says that, if I simplify this concept, that if we have a pre-market system, if you allow markets to function without unnecessary interferences, I will explain later what are the necessary interferences. That is the role of the government. If you let the market to function properly, market will eventually take your economy to the grand utility frontier. And then I also use the word Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency is defined like this. If your economy is at a Pareto efficient level, you cannot make anybody better off without making someone worse off. Simply, the idea behind that is you have exhausted all the inefficiencies. You have achieved the optimal resource allocation for the economy so that there is no room for improvement. Now, if you look at this, if you move from any point, say if you are somewhere here, individual 1 get this level of welfare, individual 2 get this level of welfare. You can map these two axes. But if you move down, individual 2's satisfaction level, utility level goes down, but others' utility level goes up. So that's why we say that when you improve individual one's welfare, you are improving it at a cost to the individual too. We cannot improve one's welfare without reducing. That is what we meant by Pareto efficiency. Now, if I go back to the fundamental theorem of welfare, now, what it says is basically pre-market equilibrium is Pareto efficient, means pre-market equilibrium take us to the grand utility frontier. So that is, in a nutshell, this is economics. If somebody doesn't believe this, then there's some problem with either his training or his attitude or orientation. So we can discuss this. I mean, here we I hope we have enough time for this discussion. And okay, now this also gives us one thing, that now Pareto efficiency means that we cannot improve one's welfare without reducing another one's welfare. And also remember that economy can be at any point on the Pareto efficiency. It can be somewhere in the middle, somewhere like this. Then the distribution is somewhat equal. Like say, if you are in point A, both individuals get reasonable, equitable welfare levels. But if you are in level B, individual 1 get higher welfare, whereas individual 2 get lower welfare. One of the problems with market economy is that market economy can put you anywhere in this curve. It doesn't guarantee that you get an equitable distribution. So that is fundamentally where that SEPA's existence on working on poverty is justified, because markets don't guarantee. Some people can be always left out. Some people can get lower income, lower welfare level in the market economy. Correcting that is broadly our mandate. And also, if you look at this normal situation in a country, we have say assume that in this particular graph, we have this grand utility frontier. If you think about 2019 situation, we were in some sort of frontier, which may not be the best potential. Maybe we are far below the potential level. We were in some sort of equilibrium at that time. And at that time, our poverty levels were not very high. So what we were doing is actually, we were trying, SEPA and others who are working on poverty, were actually trying to move, if economy is in point C, we are not very happy with the distribution. So we were pushing the economy towards A. If you are in point B, we were pushing it towards point A. So we need a more equitable society. So that's what SEPA was doing. Then now we also had the last 2-3 weeks, we were talking about multidimensional poverty and all that. So all that is what we were doing was that. Now, if you look at the situation with the economic crisis, what happened? A lot of people lost the job opportunities, and economy had so many other distortions. And then, SME sector, agriculture sector all had difficulties. As a result, our grand utility frontier was shifted down. That shift resulted in income loss for a lot of people. So now, that's why I said I was trying to explain this to some of my colleagues. We are in a different situation now. We really take the economy back to where we were. That will have a huge impact on poverty, right? Because earlier people were having a much higher income, like at point A and point C. Now point B and C, B and D, income levels are low. So therefore, we need to have a different approach. That different approach does not mean we need to be deviate from multidimensional poverty or anything, but we need to really look at the ways where we can put the economy back to a more productive economy, that whatever that level we at least had in 2019. So that, I think, is also a little bit of deviation from my main topic, to put our perspective in the current economic context. So now, let me go to the pre-market economy. I think everybody knows what it is. Basically, But the story about this theory looks like a fairy tale. No? I mean, market economy takes you to a gradually frontier, can be, I mean, it is not a religion so that you can readily believe it. So what does the empirical evidence say to us? If you really look at the history, recent history, there are ample evidence that those countries followed market principles properly are the ones which reduce poverty reasonably. I'm not going to explain all of them, but if you look at some of them, actually, I experienced myself. I work in countries like Vietnam and China. So they were socialist countries before. Once they started to, when they opened the economy to market economies, the way their poverty was reduced, I personally witnessed, since I worked on these countries, especially China, did this experiment initially with one province, only allowing agriculture to be a private enterprise. And then China showed the tremendous growth in that province's agriculture, and then gradually it opened up and finally became the factory of the globe. And China reduced, I think, the largest number of people in poverty actually were taken out of poverty by this. But this story is not as simple as this. It's not like a simple medicine that cure your problem, but it's much more complicated. But basic essence is that even as a development practitioner who worked in Asian Development Bank with 40 countries in Asia, I'm very much convinced, based on my personal observations and the evidence, that the countries which really followed the market principles in a reasonable way are the ones which were able to reduce poverty and experience growth. So, but then if we accept this is always challenge whether market is the right institute, especially in Sri Lanka. A lot of people don't believe that. They argue against it. That's fine. We can discuss that. But if market is doing that great job, what is the role of the government? Now, that is the next question. But unfortunately, market, I already pointed out one thing. Market is unable to provide the equitable solution. So that some intervention has to be done through tax policy or some other measures, social protection policy or whatever, to make it equitable. How equitable it should be depending on the country and people's values. Now, countries like US don't believe too much on equity, but European countries put more emphasis on it. Scandinavia put even higher emphasis on equity. It's a cultural and political, historical thing that depending on the country, some people really value equity, some people value less, likewise. But then there are other issues. There are some market failures. Market doesn't do that nice job in every sector equally. There are market failures. So these are some of the areas where the government has to come in and correct it. So that's what I'm going to discuss to the rest of my lecture. Now, before I go to that, one important, very, very important observation from the discussion so far is that inaction is one of the best policies. If market works well in a sector, let it go. Don't meddle with that. I think I can list 20, 30 examples, very recent ones where the government meddled with some of the sectors, and then those sectors collapsed completely because before the government intervention, the market-oriented those industries and so on are doing reasonably well. But then intervention really destroyed it. So therefore, rule number one: if market is looking after a sector very well, if there are no failures, don't touch that sector, let it go. The market will take care of that. Because how market take care of that, it is through the competition. But now, to ensure there is a competition, there's a role for the government to create the enabling environment. That's what I'm going to discuss in next couple of minutes. I said inaction is a very good policy in the right places. And the government's engagement in all literature, they categorize as two: the first order engagement and second order engagement. First order engagement is the create enabling environment for market to function. Markets don't naturally, it's not like a natural ecosystem. Markets function within created environment by the governments. So the created environment should have certain characteristics. The national defense is important. Without peace, no economy can function well. Human rights, provision of dispute resolution and justice, I will explain the importance of that. And also very importantly, ensure property rights. A private market-oriented economy cannot function if the property rights are not properly established. For example, if you work abroad and then earn some dollars and come and put in a local bank, and if the government take that dollars and then the property right is not with you. See, this is a very good example. There are about $900 million in NRFCs, according to recent discussions in media and so on. All that money was borrowed by the government. So the people who deposited, including me, some of them, we cannot get the money back. So then this is a fundamental alien property right. And I can give you many examples. Even if you have a jack tree in your home garden, you can't cut it, you can't sell it, you can transport it. The property right of that tree has been taken by the government in the name of environment. So that suppresses all the private sector timber development. Property right is a fundamental thing. Those things should be provided by the government. And then these are also part of the institutions, but then create the economic institution that foster competition. That's very, very important. We should not allow the monopolies to be created in the economy. We should ensure there is some reasonable competition. For example, if you take rice milling sector in Sri Lanka, there's some sort of oligopoly. Few players have, bigger share. They manipulate the market prices. That means, there's no competition. The fundamental role of the government to ensure this competition. And then second order engagement is intervention in the market economy, which I will explain further, like your tax policy, maintaining a reasonable exchange rate, not artificially, but market-oriented one, and intervening with the interest rate, and also managing the budget, and then, ensure debt sustainability. Those are the secondary kind of involvement of the government. And then here again, another important rule coming out of this basic analysis is that the state acts if and only if it can improve social welfare. So state's action should be subject to cost-benefit analysis. If we did a cost-benefit analysis on this Lotus Tower and some of the stuff that people are always talking, they shouldn't be there. That analysis, a genuine cost-benefit analysis, would have revealed that this is not a worthwhile investment. Even the road from Matara to Hambantota would, analysis would say that this segment doesn't have enough traffic, so it should be built after 20 years or so. So that is a fundamental one, which is also missing in Sri Lanka. Many of the countries where I work, there is a legal requirement to do a cost-benefit analysis for major investment projects. The project comes from World Bank or ADB, we do that. But most of the projects with the borrowed money from money using this sovereign bonds and so on, utilized without any cost-benefit analysis. That's why we see exorbitant cost of some of the roads. Like, I can tell you that this road segment from Rambukkana to Galagedara, 1 kilometer cost about $93 million. But average, I checked in ADB, average is like, $1 million per kilometer, but that figure should be carefully evaluated, but the most highest value in that ADB sample of 80 project is our Southern Highway. Southern Highway cost us about 7 million. See the cost difference, 7 million to 93 million. There are a couple of actually tunnels in this new road that I was talking, but even with that tunnels, it cannot. So that's why I think, it's very important that the public sector investments, they should be subject to cost benefit analysis. That's why I actually emphasize that we need to do this training. We should somehow, make sure that at least in the future, we do some proper assessments before making big investment. Okay, now if I go to the role of the government, I think I can categorize these roles into major four. One is provide for a stable set of economic institutions. This is very important because this is a subject that is not being discussed in detail in our discussions in economics. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time. Then the market failures, which actually I will go through very quickly, and also macroeconomic stability. You know very well what happened to the economy because we were not looking at the macroeconomic stability properly in recent times. We were maintaining the negative current account balance throughout 30, 40 years. We were maintaining negative budget balance throughout the period, and we were borrowing from abroad and using it for consumption and other purpose. That's why eventually our economy collapsed. So the institutions, actually this is Adam Smith again saying that erecting and maintaining certain public institutions, which it can never be for the interest of any individual or a small number of individuals. The way we set up institutions will decide the distribution in a country. So that's why even that time, 1976, he said that the institution should not be favoring a couple of individuals or a group of individuals, rather it should be for the benefit of the larger population. And also institution is something that, very, I don't have a lot of time to go into details, but institutions generally refer to the conventions, rules, and entitlements that define the domain of choice of economic agents. Now, when you look at the economy from the institutional perspective, we consider economy as a set of transactions. As we talk here, millions of transactions, even in this tiny economy, is taking place. Some people are buying bread, some people are buying fertilizer, some people are selling clothes. These are transactions. This set of transactions is the economy. Now, for these transactions, the economic institutions will tell you what to buy, what not to buy, and all that. So these institutions signals the economic agents to make a decision on these things. So but it is very important that institutions are correctly set so that market economy, the demand supply interaction, undistorted right kind of price that allocate resources in the economy happens in that way. Few characteristics of institutions, I think you can also relate to the Sri Lankan context. The right kind of institutional should have lower transaction cost in economy. Transaction cost is include the obtaining information, cost of negotiating contract, cost of enforcing contracts. Now, if you really look at what is happening in the country, I can give you one example. Now, if you look at in Colombo, this apartment market. Now, if you invest on an apartment while it is being constructed, they promise you so many things like certain number of square feet and certain quality of wood in your pantry cupboard, certain tiles and this and that. But when you go after 3 years to pay the last payment, you will find that you have already paid 75%. You see that even the square feet is not what is promised. Certain unusable areas also part of this calculation. Wood is not the one it is shown in the model and all that. But then what can you do? Can you go to courts and get a relief on this issue? It will take 30 years. And then that difficulty in negotiating these things is a big problem. So a lot of people had this. Actually, there was one study done by a student in Jawaharlal University that really explained this apartment market situation. Actually, then what happens is that market collapses. Then you might ask why then so many buildings were built and so on, but there are other reasons. A lot of black money went into that. Some people, some professionals who are not, who want to evade taxes, like private practicing doctors and lawyers, they keep currency and invest on that. And a lot of black money were transferred to these things. And so that's why it survived to some extent, but it cannot go beyond that without those kind of, proper economic institutions in place. The legal system, I'm not going to go through this, just look at these slides. You know how it works in Sri Lanka. Clarity, protection of property rights, I already wrote, procedure for, and stability and predictability, sense of fairness, accessibility. There are all these areas we have issues. So when you have those problems, the market economy does not function well. And I will skip this slide. But the economic institutions basically, also I think I have one slide here. Now, by 2018 or so, our economy, we were at the $4,000 per capita range. And people are talking about the next step is to convert Sri Lankan economy to a knowledge-based economy. And then we were even discussing the certain institutional aspects of a knowledge-based economy, effective of legislation improving on entrepreneurship, effectiveness in judicial system in keeping the lower level of transaction cost and supporting effective market mechanism, competitive pressure. In fact, we don't have a law, although we liberalize the economy, we don't have a legal provision to ensure the competitiveness in the country. And financial market should, support faster growing kind of enterprises. But if you know the banking system here, and if you talk to some of the entrepreneurs who are trying to get a loan from our banking system, none of these things are in place. Now, these institutions and the quality of the institution can be measured actually by the total factor productivity. Total factor productivity is something like that. If you have an economy, you have labor, capital, natural resource, and management. And if you allocate, if you assign, say, if there's a 10% growth, if you assign how much we can allocate to the labor expansion, how much to the capital, and so on, there's unexplained part. That is called total factor productivity. That actually reflects the quality of institution in a country. Now, if you look at this graph, data is a bit old, but if you really, measure the total factor productivity and GDP growth, look how these two are closely related. That is an indication of the institutional weaknesses in the country. I think even if you extend this beyond 2014, I think we will see the same kind of relationship. And also, I think I'll skip this graph. This is also, this very obvious thing, rule of law and income level are very highly correlated. So, but I will, there's this book written by these two individuals called Why Nations Fail. Actually, it's a very popular book and easy reading. It's a bedtime reading if you have sleeping difficulties. So their conclusion, I think, is very important. Whether countries come out of poverty depends on the kind of institutions you have in that country. So creating that institutional setup is one of the roles of the government. And I think in Sri Lankan context, we have a lot to do. Even we don't understand the problems, we don't discuss these institutional issues. Very rarely I have seen even any of the discussions we had about the economy, institutions are discussed properly. I'm also not an expert on that part of the subject, but I know definitely there are a lot of weaknesses in that side. And then market failures are the other areas where the government should work. Now, very quickly, I will go through this. The externalities are certain things like, certain costs are not considered by producers. Like if you are cultivating tobacco in upland area, your soil get eroded and the soils come to the reservoirs and then it have an effect on the hydropower production. But the farmer doesn't pay for that. There's a kind of market failure. So government has to do something, put a tax or some other thing to correct that. We call it internalizing externalities. And there are certain things called public goods. Public goods are the ones which really, have these characteristics of non-excludability. National defense is a public good. Once you provide national defense to certain level, you cannot exclude anybody from it. So, but the problem that markets will not provide optimum level of the public goods. Now, if you take education and health, these are quasi-public goods. Quasi means they are not like the national defense. So the public sector, private, if you leave the education to completely private sector, it will be underprovided. So there should be public sector, private sector, both providing education and health. That's what basically, but when you really address this, we have to go into more details about the particular country's health education sectors and, make decisions. And then monopolies, certain monopolies are unavoidable. Like, for example, it is not economical to have 5 electricity lines selling electricity on a competitive basis. So it's a natural monopoly. So that has to be provided by the government. Water lines are the same. Initially, even telephones were like that, but new technology solved the problem after as hand phone came, then, you don't need to have competition was there. So the natural monopolies, then, monopoly, that monopoly means you have the authority to decide the price. So then the government should control it. Government should regulate monopolies to ensure that there are no exorbitant pricing. And then there are information problems. We have basically 2 types of information problems. We call adverse selection and moral hazard. I'm not going to explain them, but these problems sometimes create very difficult situations. For example, if you take used car market, if I'm selling my used car, I will always tell this is in the best condition. It doesn't have any problem with the brake, engine is perfect, is blah blah. So then but buyer has no way to know that. You can take it to some technician, somebody, but you cannot detect it. There's the information gap. So that leads to some problem. I mean, some countries have found some easy solutions for that. In, for example, Norway, if you buy a car, you can return the car within 1 month. If you find some problem, you can return and the money should be given back. But we cannot do that in a society like ours. There should be a certain amount of honesty to implement those kind of policies, because people might, every month buy a car and return it. Somebody can do it forever. Like, for example, in US, if you buy a jewelry, you can return it within 7 days also, because with the lighting, this and that, your decision may be biased because of, the marketing agents, whatever. So you go home and wear the jewelry, and if you're not happy, you can return it. If you have this policy in a country like ours, probably nobody will buy jewelry. For every wedding you buy jewelry, you return. So there's a certain level of that is also part of the economic institutions. I forgot to talk about that. Not only regulatory part, there's belief culture is part of the economic institutions. Now, one of the biggest problems in Sri Lanka's economic institutions is that our habit of lying and cheating. You might wonder, I mean, why an economist is talking about this lying, is how it is a big problem, because there should be a certain amount of trust for, I said the economy is a set of transactions. There should be a certain amount of trust between buyer and seller. When that trust is not there, then that market collapses and lead to so many inefficiencies. For example, that lying and cheating is a problem at the top level. Like, for example, 3 months ago, some of the top leaders in the country said, we are not going to do any domestic debt restructure. And then after, last week they did it, but they invented a new word, debt optimization. So that they can come out and say, no, we are not restructuring, we are optimizing. So, but think about that, the policy uncertainty creating. Now, when somebody say that your pension or your deposits will not be touched, I know, I feel that they are going to touch it after 3 months. So see the kind of, relation to it. So then economics is all about behavior, people react to those things. Some people, try to take the money and like 1930s, they put the money in the box and, hide it somewhere. And something like those kind of things are already happening, I heard, to some extent. Because people lose the confidence on the system. That is the top level. The bottom level, what happened, when these people are selling jack, they dip this jack in Harpic solution to keep it without, ripening, to reduce the cost. So they buy the whole tree and then harvest all the fruits and then keep them in a Harpic solution and sell it for 1 week, 2 weeks. So then, they don't get ripe. Cost never become Varaka. So they can sell and make a profit. But think that, once it comes out in the newspapers, people were really worried about and people reduce consumption of jack that was sold. So this beliefs culture play a big part, but that is also the most difficult part to correct. Regulations, if you have right kind of government, we can change quickly. But this cultural thing is actually worrisome. Without correcting that also, I think a country cannot move forward. And I think then these coordination failures and incomplete property right, I already discussed. So these are the things that justify take you to that grand utility frontier I showed. So that's how the government role should be defined in economy. And the macroeconomic management is another function that actually we are the best example now in the world for macroeconomic. We kept our dollar at 200 rupees per dollar while knowing it will be something around 300. I don't know why, I still cannot understand and all that. And also in the middle of this crisis, while we are having this COVID and all the other problems, and we were trying to, go to these fancy homegrown solutions by some of our economic leaders. I cannot understand that because we are a small nation and we have to look around the world and see how other countries are doing. We are not going to invent totally new economic system to the world. What we should have done is we should have looked at outside how others are doing. And whatever the others have benefited by doing certain things, if they are applicable to us, we have to do it. We should not, in my view, try to have these homegrown solutions and totally out of the box things. Out of the box things work in a small thing, not in macroeconomic management. Certain things in economics are like gravity. You have gravity in USA, you have gravity in India, you have gravity in... Certain economic principles are like that too. If your import increase, your exchange rate, your currency will go down. So these things are like very, very clear examples of certain rules. So we cannot work against gravity or certain economic rules. Certain economic things we can actually manipulate. Now, in terms of macroeconomic management, we need to it's government's role to have a proper exchange rate regime. The best is to align with the market. When market volatility is high, probably, within certain range, you can avoid unnecessary volatility. But if you go against market, what will happen is that our rupee will, we are keeping at a higher value. At one point in time, we have to release it, and then it will go from 200 to 350. that distortion creates a lot of damage. But if it is actually gradual devaluation due to fundamental things about our dollar inflow and outflow, demand and supply, then economy can adjust to this thing. Business can adjust to this thing. If the rupee is going from $200 to $300 sudden, no business can survive. It is too much. So those kind of basic principle, and also maintaining this negative balance of payment throughout 20-30 years of period, and then borrowing and managing it. We should have seen this in very advanced. And also, now if you really look at, I was listening to one of these great economists. Actually, he gave a talk in Peradeniya. I also listened to him. Professor Pemachandra Athukoral. His presentation was very, I have it with me. If you like, I can share the PowerPoint. He very clearly showed that the highest growth we had in 2011 or so, but 70% came from the non-tradable sector, construction and things. So that means we are going to have a dollar shortage in the future. Any simple analyst would have seen the dollar shortage with that. But we never paid any attention. That's why I think that it's very important that the country's macroeconomy is managed properly. The government has a bigger role, and part of that role is keeping the central bank independent and keeping the economic management transparent. Now, that is another big problem in Sri Lanka. You cannot get a lot of data. A lot of the data that is necessary now. I think I always take India as an example. India has maintained very good database in the web. You can download many things. We are intransparent to the extent that even ADB was planning to have its annual meeting in 2022. President and Vice President came in February, March, economy crashed. Even ADB World Bank was not aware that there's a huge impending crisis. That's a clear indication that we are not transparent. We should be transparent. Macroeconomic indicators should be, publicly available. Some are available, but the credibility of them is also questioned. A lot of people believe that sometimes, they may be manipulated and so on. And debt sustainability is another good example where the government should maintain certain sustainable level of debts. That we never did. Then also the fiscal policy that we were overspending, sometimes for a lot of unnecessary things. Here, there's also huge room for us to prioritize certain sectors like health and education, long-term growth related sectors, rather than, prioritizing certain things like paving all the roads and this and that. Especially, there are a lot of, misalignment of incentives here. This road business has become very profitable one for our political leaders. So that's why they are paving all the rural roads and so on. But I was also working on the trade, transport sector in ADB. The transport benefit are highest when you are connecting a remote community to the system. Improving the connected community little bit doesn't give a lot of returns. There's nothing, whatever the community produces already coming to the market, whether the road is paved or not, it is the same. There's a comfort actually when you have paved road to your village, but that comfort is enjoyed by those who have cars and this and that. Probably we are not at that stage yet. So those actually macroeconomic management, I think huge gaps in our country. What we experience today is because in all these different aspects of macroeconomic management, we did a lot of wrong things. Purposely, knowingly, unknowingly, we cannot say some are knowingly, some are unknowingly, but now we know the results for sure. Now, this is actually, I just did this lecture for some of the government senior staff some times ago. Then at the end, I asked these questions, this lecture should give you a framework to answer some of the questions that I have put here. I mean, now there is a lot of effort to sell, privatize Air Lanka and this and that, Petroleum Corporation and so on. But why did we in the first place keep them as government? The petroleum is buying and selling business. A market-oriented one, we can go to whatever that grand duty frontier by keeping it private sector. We don't need to really, but since it is, we cannot have enough competition in the country, some regulatory mechanism is necessary for petroleum sector. So we could have done it long time ago. We didn't do those things. And also, a lot of the things under social protection programs, should we build houses and distribute to people? We should create enabling environment for people to earn good income. Building a house is their responsibility. Of course, there are certain exceptions. When nobody wants to go to Anuradhapura 40 years ago, building some quarters for teachers, that's fine. There's a failure there. But generally, so likewise, we always have, various things. And when we distributed Silredi, religion is something, to me, is a very private thing. If you want to take observe Sil, fine. But what is the role of the government in? We had so many debates about private universities. Now, finally.
Question. When you say school books, is this textbooks or exercise books, or does it not matter?
Well, any book. I'm not saying should not be. Some of them should be.
Yeah.
Because, you can have a certain policy to have everybody to have universal access to pre-education up to grade 12. Then you distribute book, it is okay. Some of this in the list we should do. Some of them should not. Okay. Fertilizer subsidy again, another very important one that I was just doing some work for FAO. I did a little bit of, search about the, CIF prices, and without protection, none of our field crops can survive. If you remove all the import taxes, then big onion, red onions, chili, potato, all will disappear from our agriculture. What happened was that by protecting them for too long period of time, we never let these, farmers to be efficient. Even Department of Agriculture didn't have incentives to produce much higher yielding varieties, because with the protection that whatever yield they get is sufficient. So if we open that sector some times ago, initially there will be some noise, some disturbances, this and that, but finally market will find better set of crops from which, with which farmers can compete. Now, problem is that, we cannot sustain these import taxes forever, especially under the current situation. Now we are actually in a situation that we have to listen to IMF and other international donors and so on. Also, we don't have surpluses to subsidize our agriculture and keeping. Therefore, that is why these things are long-term. In a short period of time, they might be sustained, but in the long run, at some point, we have to remove the import taxes. Then the industries will collapse. So, the size of the government, and the big problem, we have this huge government, very inefficient, and service delivery is not good. Like, for example, in Japan, I think the population is 140 million. The total government size is, I think, 750,000 people. But here, 22 million, we have about 1.5 million size government, which is also very inefficient.
Question would be whether by government with your civil public service to expand the numbers once.
So it has been, now we have this practice of producing, graduates from public universities, and then, after a couple of years, we somehow put them in some public service. And then, always our public sector is increased. It is unsustainable. Now we have to reduce the public service, but that the way we reduce is also not correct. You should have a proper plan. Initially, to reduce, what we did was that we did not replace those who retired. But some of the retired people are specialists, like eye surgeons and various, senior doctors retired. If you don't replace those kind of positions, that sector can collapse. We need to have a proper plan, even reducing the government service. Some gradual plan for 5 to 10 years. Without that, you cannot do that. Then it will also destroy. And certain things like free vaccine for COVID-19 should be so public good. If you are vaccinated, I am also protected. So these are some of the things that we should do. There are some certain things we can justify in this list. But just I put that list, this was given to some non-economist senior level government officials, and I asked each question and discussed with them. I think I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot to all those who joined online, and just let me tell you a little bit about our next lecture that will be happening on the 19th of July, bringing culture into development by Dr. Nazira Rajapaksa. She's an assistant professor at the University of Paris, one Cantillon Sorbonne. And I welcome you all to join us on the 19th. Thanks once again, Dr. Dinatilaka, and I think it should give a round of applause. Thank you.